Welcome back. We're talking about China's young adults, a generation for whom China's rapid development has presented enormous opportunity and a number of challenges. Still with us, Dychtwald is the author of the new book, Young China, How the Restless Generation Will Change Their Country and the World. And joining us for this part of the show from New York, Ruonan Zheng is a journalist for Jing Daily, and from Chicago, Dali Yang is a professor of political science at the University of Chicago. Thanks for joining us. Ruonan, let me start with you. We've just been listening to Zach talk about his book, Young China. What do you make of his observations of China's millennials?
Thanks for having me. I like his argument about the old China and the young China. And certainly in China, the current millennial are making a lot of waves. Especially the trend we're seeing is that a lot of kids who went to study abroad are the one that defining the new voices in China.
Professor Dali Yang, you've studied this generation that we're talking about. You've studied them extensively. We've been talking a lot here about the challenges they face, especially education. How do you see the challenges that they face? I mean, there are 400 million millennials in China.
Well, first of all, congratulations to Zach. It's a very timely book and an important topic, definitely. Of course, from my perspective, extraordinary generation. This is the generation that's the best educated in massive numbers, having the most information ever for the average person relative to the authorities. But what I find also, and we pay attention to a lot, is also the tremendous regional disparities, the disparities between urban and rural. And of course, the challenges facing many families, as Zach has also referred to, in terms of meeting the rising expectations of different generations. But of course, at the same time, this generation is going through this demographic transition that's also going to be so challenging because China is becoming aging. This will be the generation that's caught between the old and retiring, and they are actually going to be having far fewer babies down the road. As a result, of course, that's very difficult for any country, including China, to navigate in the coming decades.
Ruonan, we've been talking about the pressures that young Chinese face. Let's say you're a young Chinese person, a boy or a girl, in high school in China. Take us through some of the pressures that you would face to try and get into a good school or a good university.
I would say, first of all, you're facing a lot of competition among your peers, and especially the pressure from your family to enter into this national exam. And the pressure is on because it is one time only, and you don't have much choice. You can only take it once. And to take it next year, you have to go through this very struggling process of a whole year of preparation. And it's a lot of physical and emotional goes into that. And if you're not performing well in this national exam, that could determine your job, that could determine your whole network, what's going to be in the next 5 years.
Professor, just about a week ago, we did a show on women in Chinese business. And one of the things we looked at is China has a very large proportion of women in business, more so than any other country in the world. And one of the reasons for that was education and the fact that they were being educated in science, especially math. When you look at young Chinese now and those challenges that they face, of course, the country's economic model is changing from manufacturing to innovation. How does that affect young Chinese and the way in which they're educated?
Well, number one, the numbers are large. As has just been mentioned, 8 to 9 million people actually graduate from college each year in China. That's several times the US number, in fact. But at the same time, more and more people are getting a college degree, college education. There's a lot of emphasis on the STEM subjects in science and technology and so on. And of course, a growing number of children are being educated abroad as well. So as a result, actually, we have truly a remarkable generation in terms of the education capacities. Despite the competition that was just mentioned, in fact, many parents are encouraging their children to pursue their interests, their dreams. And in fact, also the children themselves are redefining what they want. In fact, they develop their own communities, their own values. Companies and platforms such as Bilibili, for example, offer the young people opportunity to articulate their own values as well. So in that sense, all of those are combining to make all those people, many of them actually becoming entrepreneurs online, being creative, and so on.
Zach?
This push from an imitative economy to an innovative economy is sort of on the minds and in the hearts of every young person that I talk to. There's a certain pragmatism to that. So this idea that you need to follow your passion, when you look at people like Jack Ma, who have really become sort of the the cult of Ma, as people joke, he stands for Chinese innovation, for that new wave of innovators. With that, you have to the passion, sort of that drive to keep you up later, to do the 9-9-6, 9 hours a day, from 9 in the morning to 9 at night, 6 days a week. That's what they joke the startup schedule is in China. So mixing that passion with the education, you're also seeing, as was mentioned, 1 in 3 students studying abroad in the United States right now are from China, 1 in 3. So a lot of people who are legislating within China recognize the downsides of their education system. Doesn't necessarily breed innovators. So they're actually encouraging people, as was mentioned before, to study abroad in the United States and then go home. Many people who are getting educated in the United States right now are going home because the opportunities are better. The ability to get funding for your startup is better. So the education for innovation is often happening here, not always, but often. And then young people are deciding to go home for those extra big, extra good opportunities and that surge of development that they feel like they want to enjoy.
Ruonan, talking about the kind of education that Chinese students get, the good news is that Chinese students, we hear, test very well. But the one criticism we hear is that they're not very good at critical thinking skills. Is that a valid criticism in your view?
I would say people in young China who still receive the conventional education would be so, but as Dak referred, more and more people are studying abroad in China, and those generations are very special. It's because they kind of seen the best and worst from both society, and they're thrown into an environment that they first can't seek help from their parents, and they have to make a decision and come up to take responsibility on that. And through that process, I would say this generation is actually can turn China from, we say, the copycat to a true innovator because they develop their own consciousness. And actually a fun anecdote story from New Yorker is that President Xi's daughter is one of them. So she graduated, I believe, from Harvard. And people say, she could bring conversations in the dinner table to her dad, President Xi, who haven't received any foreign education whatsoever. And so people like President Xi's daughter, when they go back to China, they actually make a conscious decision to decide what kind of China they want to see.
Professor Yang, what is your view on that, on the education system in China? Is there a gap between students that test very well and the need to develop critical thinking skills?
Well, certainly there are issues, but let's keep in mind even the US system, we have 3,000 to 4,000 colleges, and there are a lot of variations, definitely. Of course, we tend to have a very idealistic view of American education, especially in the elite private colleges and so on. But overall, though, of course, we also have a lot of other providers of educational institutions, in fact, educational resources as well. In the Chinese case, increasingly, colleges are also trying, and in fact, the elite colleges within China, many of the students get to study abroad through exchange programs, through summer camps, and so on. But at the same time, there are many others that also require a lot of political instructions and also rote learning. So there is a lot of diversity and disparity, especially between the urban centers along the coast and the interior regions and so on. But I do want to emphasize, however, that the Chinese government recognizes the disparities and has been pouring a lot of resources into the underdeveloped regions in recent years in particular.
Sorry, you want to say something?
Sure, yeah. In terms of that push towards innovation, I think this is really important. So in my book, I interviewed some people who got perfect scores on their SATs. There's only 500 plus out of 1.6 million who do that. These 2 individuals in particular tested in their second language. They're in very rare air here. What made those 2 so unique is, we think of young Chinese as 考试怪物, test monsters. That's what they call them in China. But you're starting to see this evolution of sort of consciousness about what it takes to be successful, what it means to strive, what it means to have a dream. You know, this whole idea of the Chinese dream, it started out as a nationwide thing, and then it became very personal. What is your Chinese dream? What's my Chinese dream? Innovation is an absolutely essential part of that, because people are seeing that before, if you were making shirts and running a factory, you were the most successful person. Now you're starting to see if you are a startup boss, if you're creating some of this disruptive change within China, not only will you be successful, you're also going to be encouraged by the government, as was just mentioned, in terms of the amount of funding that the government is sort of pushing towards innovation, and also closing the disparity between urban and rural, particularly in the world of education.
And when we look at the way young Chinese think, Zach, this ambition that's embodied in the way they think, is that being carried over to the rest of the world? I mean, what do Chinese millennials teach the rest of the world?
Sure. This is a really interesting question. So when my friends talk about studying for the Gaokao, studying for the college entrance exam, the word they use is pinming. It means to put their life on the line. Now, if you'd ask me what I was doing when I was 18, I was not putting my life on the line to try to get into college. It just wasn't on my radar. If you look at the startup culture in China, it's the same exact thing. That intensity, that ability to focus, that ability to compete at a higher level, it's difficult to match that from the rest of the world. The real question is going to be this sort of innovation question. Alongside this incredible ability to eat bitter, right, which used to define the older generation in China, will this younger generation also be able to match that with innovation? That's the real question. And you're starting to already see signs that, yes, frankly, they will be able to.
Right. Ruonan, if we look beyond education, if we look at some of the other challenges that young Chinese face, especially social challenges, there's an expression that is used to describe Chinese women who are 27 and over, who are not married. They're called leftover women. It sounds derogatory, but what exactly is meant by that?
So leftover women means that they are not married, and their people around their social circle are kind of leaving them behind because they are keeping up the space. And especially women in China, they are under expectation of being married, of being behaved in a certain way, of so-called, not being so far ahead than their male peers. So that kind of pressure between their counter gender and their parents, their family comparing them to, so that is what makes them leftover, meaning people don't want to, be associated with them, or, just have this very negative stigma over their entire personality.
But for young women, do they put off marriage until later, or put off having a family until later because they want to get ahead with their careers first?
Yes, I would say more them, have this conscious of me first, putting me ahead of themselves. And especially, people that I've talked to who have, been study abroad, who have received higher education, understand, that marriage is not the first thing when it comes to their life. And they certainly do a great deal parenting their own parents, to constantly educating them what it means to be themselves and develop their own identity of being a woman in China today.
Professor, you wanted to say something?
Well, of course, it's not unique to China. It's very much an urban phenomenon globally. You look around in Hong Kong, in Taipei, in Singapore, similar phenomena have happened before, but of course it's coming to Chinese cities, actually. And of course, that creates a very interesting kind of social landscape, as well as in terms of family dynamics.
Ruonan was talking about children teaching their parents. Is there a big difference in the way of thinking between generations in China?
Oh, enormous. And how could there not be? Yeah. When my dad was deciding whether or not to go to Woodstock in 1969, my friend's parents in China were struggling through the Cultural Revolution, deep, real poverty. The amount of change this older generation has witnessed is really unbelievable. And this young generation, the idea that now kids are being raised with iPads instead of being raised on the farm, it's a type of generation gap that cannot be compared pretty much anywhere else in the world. And it causes, like was just referenced, this friction between old and new, these two tectonic plates. I think leftover women is a great example of that. There's this expectation that you should marry young, start a family. That's tradition. But then there's also the reality that you need to be educated longer than you were. Educated often until you're 25, and then you have 2 years to date, find a husband, and then marry. Otherwise, you're considered socially inedible, the leftovers. It's a type of friction that causes incredible stress on this young generation, but it also is an opportunity to redefine what it means to be Chinese in the modern world.
And that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. The book is Young China, written by Zach Dychtwald. And Zach, any plans to translate this into Chinese?
That's my big hope. You know, you don't write about someone and then not let them read it. My hope is that this is on shelves in China as soon as possible. People can read it, get back to me, and we can start to really do that two-way bridging.
Well, good luck with that, and thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much.
That's all we have time for, but the conversation continues online. Chat with us about this or any other show on Twitter. We're at CGTN America, or visit us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/CGTN America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.